All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It is 5:30, so we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jessica Height, and I am a wildlife educator with the Nevada Department of Wildlife. Tonight's program is about Nevada Knockout, which is going to be starting here in just a couple of weeks, and it is a highlight on one of our categories, Nevada Noggins. So first, a couple of housekeeping items. So just as a reminder, I cannot see or hear you, so you don't need to worry about any of that. And for this particular program, we do have the chat turned off. So if you have any questions or comments throughout the program, please direct them to the Q&A box. I have my wonderful colleague, Jess Wolf, helping me out tonight, so she will be answering any of the questions that you might have throughout the program. Additionally, just a reminder that if you are putting anything in the Q&A box, please keep it on topic and appropriate for everyone, as this is a family-friendly program. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm gonna go ahead and launch a poll that should be popping up on your screens. And I am curious, how many of you have heard of Nevada Knockout or have participated in the past? So this is going to be our third year of Nevada Knockout. All right. Just another 5 seconds or so. Perfect. All right, so a couple of you that are here have never heard of it, so that is super exciting. I'm excited to be able to share some of this information with you, and we have had somebody follow along before, so that is very exciting. Thanks for coming back. So Nevada Knockout is a super fun program that is a fun way to encourage both students and adults to learn more about Nevada wildlife. So it is very much like March Madness. So it is a single elimination tournament in which animals get to face off. And these are, of course, totally fictional battles that myself and my other wildlife educators get to make up. But it encourages especially students to learn more about Nevada's wildlife, research them, learn about some of their adaptations and how they survive, and what it might look like if those two animals were to meet in person. So the way we do this is by having a bracket, just like March Madness. And this is what this year's bracket looks like. And we break up the bracket into 4 different categories. So this year's categories are Nevada Noggins, which you are here to learn about tonight. So these are all kinds of animals that have different types of headgear, so any sort of attachment to their head. There's also the colorful critters. So these are very flashy or very colorful animals. We have the cutie patooties, so very lovable, cute animals, and the magnificent migrators, so animals that go on amazing migratory journeys. And we score these animals based on these 4 categories you see off to the left. So intelligent, so how smart are these animals? Their agility, if they have really good attack mechanisms, or if they have really impressive defensive adaptations. And we score these animals on each one of these 4 categories out of a score of 10, and then add those together. And that's how we determine which animal might win in a matchup. So this is how we encourage everybody else to research their animals and determine who would be the ultimate champion in the Nevada Knockout. So tonight's program, we are going to be focusing on just one of those categories, which is the Nevada Noggins. So these are all animals that have something attached to the top of their head. So we have in the top left, the Sidewinder rattlesnake. We have the moose, the desert bighorn sheep, the pronghorn antelope. We have the horned lizard, the horned lark, and the Steller's jay. So what exactly are head ornaments? So head ornaments, or headgear, we're also going to call it, is any sort of attachment to an animal's head. So these might be horns or antlers or any sort of mohawk, something like that. So I have 3 animals pictured here at the bottom. We're gonna launch a poll. One of these animals is actually fake. Can you tell me which one do you think is actually the fake All right, it's looking pretty close. We've got 50-50 answers right now. All right, let's give it about 5 more seconds. Get your votes in. Ooh. All right, let's go ahead and share those results. So we had 50-50 answers of whether the sheep is fake or the rabbit is fake. And it is actually, dun, 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 the rabbit that is fake. So the jackalope is not real, sadly. But this sheep with its 4 horns coming out all over the place is called a Jacob's sheep. It is very much real. And so is the chameleon. That would have been my guess, is that the chameleon's not real, but they also are. We're going to talk about different types of headgear that can be found here in Nevada on our wildlife. So the first one we are going to discuss is going to be antlers. So antlers are only found on members of the deer family. So members of the deer family in Nevada, of course, include mule deer and elk and also moose. So those are who are going to be donning antlers. And they're typically only on the males. The only member of the deer family that also has antlers is going to be caribou. But of course, we do not have caribou in Nevada. Antlers are made entirely of bone. So the whole entire structure is solid bone. And antlers actually fall off and regrow every single year. So that is what is pictured here on this deer. As you can see, it has lost an antler. So sometimes you get caught in the awkward stage where you only have one set of antlers. And they are going to regrow every year. So they are mostly using these antlers for the rut. So when they are trying to mate and get the attention of females. So once they have finished the rut, they will drop these antlers and then start growing a whole new set. So when they are still growing, so after they've fallen off and they start growing a new set, they are covered in this fuzz that we call velvet. So I actually brought some with me. So this is what it looks like. It's very fuzzy. And it is actually live tissue. So it is being fed with a blood supply. And while they're still growing, they still have that blood supply. But once they are full grown, the blood supply to those antlers starts to get cut off. And it'll start to feel kind of like a scab. It'll be kind of itchy and pretty annoying for the deer. And so they will start rubbing their antlers on rocks or trees, whatever they can find in the area, to rub off that velvet. And once they've rubbed off all of the velvet, then it is that nice, complete, shiny set of antlers that is made entirely of bone, just like these ones. And they have a much more pointed tip after they've finished rubbing off all of the velvet. And this all happens within just a matter of months. So they usually drop their antlers in the winter. And then again, by the summertime, they have their full set of antlers ready to go back into the rut. So that makes antlers one of the fastest growing living tissues on Earth. So they are very impressive. So what are they doing with their antlers? So a big part of what they need their antlers for is to attract females. So especially the males are going to be using these as competition among each other to attract females. And big antlers are indicators of really good genes because antlers are not necessarily exactly tied to how old an animal is. So it doesn't necessarily mean the older you get, the bigger your antlers are. It's actually more tied to the food you're getting. It takes a lot of energy to be able to grow really big antlers. So if you have access to really good food and water, then you have good genes and good foraging abilities and you'll have bigger antlers. And so that is very attractive to the females. They can also be used for protection from predators if necessary. Studies show that elk that have antlers are much less likely to be preyed upon by wolves than elk without antlers. And in moose, they can actually be used as hearing aids. So you can see the shape of the antlers on the moose is a very different shape than the other antlers on deer and elk. And they kind of have that cup, and that is going to help capture sound and direct it towards the moose's ears. So studies show that it improves their hearing by up to 20% when they have their antlers that are full grown. Antlers and horns are very often mixed up. So horns are a little bit different, and one of the main differences is that horns do not fall off at all. So true horns are on members of the Bovidae family. So that is sheep, goats, and cows will all have true horns. And I'll get into what true horns means in just a moment. But in Nevada, you're going to find horns on mountain goats and on a couple different species of bighorn sheep that live in this state. So in order to be a true horn, that means that you have a bony core. So this is the skull of a bighorn sheep, and you can see that that is actual bone that is attached to the rest of the skull. So we call it having a bony core underneath. And then the outside, the part that we typically get to see, is called the sheath, and that is made up of keratin. And that is the exact same stuff that our fingernails is made up of. So it's just a really thick layer of keratin. So I have a bighorn sheep skull here. So you can see the skull here. This is the bony core attached to the rest of the skull. And then the sheath, we had to pry this off. These do not normally come off, is hollow inside so that it can attach to the bony core. And like I said, these are attached to the animal its whole entire life, so they are not supposed to pop off. And if for some reason, in a crazy scenario, it were to lose part of its sheath, it's not going to regrow. So it won't be like an antler and it won't be able to grow another one. And so bighorn sheep often get chunks taken out of them when they're fighting with males, and none of that section will regrow. So it's stuck with the animal for its whole life, and it continues to grow as the animal ages. And you can actually tell how old animals are based on their horns. So each one of those really dark lines that's on the horn there, that is a different growth ring. So much like you would count the rings on a tree to tell how old it is, you can count the rings on a bighorn sheep horn to be able to tell how old it is. And this happens because every winter when the rams go into rut, so again when they are mating, all of their energy is going towards mating. So they are not putting any energy towards growing their horns. So it super slows down and makes this really dark ring right there. And so this happens every single year. So we are able to count those and tell us, and it'll tell us how old that animal is. So for example, here's one that is 8 years old. So we don't usually get to see the lower rings because they get brimmed off or they're not, the animal wasn't ready for mating yet, so it's not as obvious, those rings. So we usually start seeing them at 3 or 4 years old. So we are able to tell that this ram is 8 years old based on the rings on its horn. And the purpose of horns is very much for battling between males, although both females and males in bighorn sheep and in mountain goats, they do both possess horns, although the female's horns tend to be much smaller and thinner. But nannies, which are the female mountain goats, are especially aggressive with their horns. So they use their horns to be able to protect their territory, food resources, and especially their young. But the main thing that these horns are for is for battles between males. So these are two rams that are competing for females, trying to win their affection. And when they are hitting their heads together like this, it can sometimes be up to 30 miles per hour. So it can be very, very fast. So they need some pretty impressive adaptations to be able to do that. So going back to our bighorn sheep skull, you can see here, this is where the brain of the bighorn sheep would go, and this is the front of their head. So this is their forehead. And they have all of these little pockets that are in there that is filled with fluid. So when the bighorn sheep are hitting their heads together, like you see in this photo, all of these little pockets of fluid act like a sponge to help compress and take some of that shock from hitting together. And so they basically have their own built-in helmet to be able to protect their brain and their skull, something that humans definitely wouldn't be able to do. In addition to fighting the males one another, the horns can also be used for tools. Bighorn sheep have been observed using their horns to break open cacti in order to get inside where it's softer and there's no needles on it. And then there are a couple different types of unique horns. So they are not necessarily true horns. So one of them we're going to talk about is the pronghorn antelope. And pronghorn antelope are a very unique animal for a lot of reasons, but they are the only animal that possesses any sort of horns like the ones they have. And that's because they are basically a cross between horns and antlers. So just like true horns, they have a bony core underneath. So they have the bony core that is underneath connected to the skull, just like the bighorn sheep does. But then the sheath that is on the outside is also made of keratin. But what's really unique is that this sheath will fall off and regrow. And that's one of the things that in order to be a true horn, they're not supposed to fall off. So pronghorn antelope are very unique in the fact that they do pop off and they will regrow a new set. This is what it looks like when they are starting to regrow. So they have to go through a much smaller phase until they are full grown like this one. And again, both the females and the males do possess horns. And there's not a whole lot of information on what they exactly are using their horns for. They're not nearly as aggressive as rams, and they're not butting heads with one another. So there is some evidence that show that they use it for defensive territories, but there's not a whole lot of information out there on what exactly pronghorn antelope are using their horns for. A super fascinating kind of horns are on the horned lizard. So you probably know this animal as a horny toad. And what's super exciting about them is that they are true horns, just like on a bighorn sheep. So they do have bone attached to the skull. So you can see that bone is attached to the skull, just like on the other ones. And then they have the outer covering as well. But they also have little tiny horns all the way down their back, but those are just modified scales. So scales that are extra pokey to be able to protect them. But those ones that are on their head are in fact true horns. And they get their name of horny toad because they are relatively slow and wide compared to other lizards. So they're not quite as fast as the other lizards that they tend to be near. But they have a very funny defense mechanism because they are not very good at running away. So instead, they will sometimes stand their ground and puff up their body to almost 2 times its regular size, like you can see here. And the whole point of that is that they've got those pointy scales all down their back, and they're just trying to look really hard to swallow and unpleasant to eat. And it must work for them. That is the whole point, is just to puff up their body and make them look unappetizing so that predators will leave them alone. We also have the Sidewinder, which is also competing in our Nevada knockout. They get their name because they have very unique sidewinding movements. So instead of a typical rattlesnake or snakes in general that kind of make that slithering pattern, these guys will kind of skip sideways. And there's a couple different reasons for this. So they tend to be in very sandy areas where it would be difficult and they might be sliding down. So it's to help them be able to move better throughout the sand. But also it's very hot in the sand. And so this gives them the ability to not have their whole entire stomach touching the sand all at once. It gives them the ability to just have part of their stomach touching as they're rotating and kind of sidewinding throughout the sand. But they get the name of horned rattlesnake because they also have horns right above their eye that you can see there. And while these are not true horns, they are also just modified scales like on the back of the horned lizard. It's possible that these horns are to help keep sand out of their eyes. So these sidewinders are ambush predators, so they are not actively going out and looking for prey. They tend to sit and wait for prey to come to them. And while they're doing that, they'll get down in the sand and they'll wiggle their body back and forth and bury themselves in the sand. And it's possible that the horns are there to help keep sand out of their eyes, in addition to making them look super fierce. Many animals, usually birds, also have some sort of crests, and these are entirely made of feathers. So lots of birds have these kind of cool mohawks. So one is the mountain quail, and those are just individual feathers sticking out of its head. And then there is the Steller's jay. And the Steller's jay especially will use theirs to try to make themselves look bigger if they are trying to scare somebody off. And if they are not in use, they can actually lie flat down against their head if they don't need them. And these crests are very often used for mating rituals. So they are used to try to attract females, like many of the headgear that lots of animals have. Although the picture of the bottom left, that is actually a female merganser. And so that is one of the few female ducks that get to have that crest as well. And like I said, they can puff them up if they're trying to scare off predators and make themselves appear larger. There are also many birds that have horn in the name, such as the horned lark there, who is also competing in this year's Nevada Knockout. But they are also just feathers, not horns at all. So these are not going to be true horns. And then the photo there is in the bottom left is the horned grebe. I don't know if that one quite passes off as horns either, but it's in the name. And everybody knows the great horned owl, who I have brought with me tonight. And they also have those feathers, which they are using to communicate with other great horned owls. So they can actually kind of use their feathers to communicate body language. So they will move them around in different directions for territorial displays and to communicate with other owls. And of course, for mating displays as well. So out of the 7 animals that were highlighted in this year's Nevada Knockout, who do you think would be the ultimate winner of the Nevada Knockout, the Nevada Noggins category? So this is just for the category. So again, we have the Sidewinder rattlesnake, we have the moose, the bighorn sheep, Steller's jay, horned lark, horned lizard, or the pronghorn antelope. All right, we'll give it about 5 more seconds. I like it. All right, so we have a heavy favorite of the moose, but we also have a couple of votes for the bighorn sheep and even the horned lizard. I like, I like it, keeping the horned lizard in there. Well, if you want to find out who would be the victor of the Nevada Noggins category, you're going to need to follow along with this year's Nevada Knockout. So in order to do that, Jess is going to put a couple of links in the chat to let you know how you can follow along with this year's Nevada Knockout. So we do have a website that will give you all the information you could possibly need. So it gives you how to play, it gives you the brackets. So there is a bracket that you can print and take home. Gives you a little bit of information about each one of the different players, so you can learn more about the animals. And then this is also where we would post the battles. So every single week, starting on September 28th is when it officially launches. Every week on Mondays, we will let you know who won that week's matchups. And there will also be a little narrative of how exactly that story went down. So in the chat is going to be the link to this website that has all the information you might need. And there will also be a link to be able to participate. So we are doing something new this year, and we are offering prizes for anyone in the public who wants to participate. So if you want to get your friends or your coworkers together, and you can start a bid among yourselves, but if you want to be able to participate with us, you would just need to go to that sign up link and submit your bracket to us, your filled out bracket with all of your picks to us by September 28th. And if you are one of the top scorers, then we will be giving out prizes this year. We also have some other upcoming webinars on the other categories of Nevada Knockout as well. So next Monday on the 21st at 5:30 p.m. is going to be on one of the other categories, the Magnificent Migrators. And then next Thursday on the 24th is going to be Why is Wildlife So Cute? So we're talking all about the cutie patooties category. And our final poll of the evening is, I am curious if you are interested in participating in Nevada Knockout. So do you plan to participate with anybody at home, or if you are homeschooling your kids right now, this is a great program to be able to participate in, or possibly with coworkers as well. All right, we'll give you about 5 more seconds to answer that. Perfect. It looks like the majority of you are definitely participating. That is super awesome. I'm very excited. So my email is going to be on the very last page. And if you have any questions about how to participate in Nevada Knockout, you can absolutely email me and I can send over all of your resources and help you through, and just let me know if you have any questions on it. Thank you so much, everyone. While I have you on here, does anyone have any questions right now that we haven't gotten to, Jess?
Don't have any questions. Let's give it a few minutes. If anything pops up, definitely put those in the question and answer box so we can answer those. We'll give it about 2 minutes, but otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us.
Awesome. Yes, thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate you coming tonight.
I'm not seeing any questions coming through, so.
All right, and it looks like just about everyone is dropping off. So one more thank you, everyone, so much for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. And grab my email there if you think of anything later. And thanks so much. Have a great evening.